Good evening and welcome to the Goizueta Pavilion, which houses the Cuban Heritage Collection. My name is May Mendez, and I am the librarian and the interim chair of the CHC, and I would like to welcome you to our space to take part in this conversation between two artists. Tonight's event is sponsored by the Amigos of the Cuban Heritage Collection, a group that is devoted to making our mission a reality. Most of the time, this room is not an event space. Rather, it is a space where students and researchers from all disciplines come to explore the rich and diverse materials in our collections, from manuscripts to books to newspapers and photographs. Our collections are a treasure trove. Our task is to steward and grow these collections and to make them free and accessible to all the scholars who come through our doors. Every so often, we get to have these events where we talk to a researcher whose books draw from our collections, or to the artist whose work is now part of our archive. Such is the case with María Martínez-Cañas and her work, Quince Sellos Cubanos. Earlier this year, art collector Alan Gordich donated his copy of this limited edition portfolio to the Cuban Heritage Collection, which is currently on exhibit and will be up through the spring of 2016. We took the donation and subsequent exhibit as an opportunity to peek into Martínez-Cañas' process. We asked University of Miami Professor Tomás López to guide us in this conversation based on his own impressive career as a photographer, whose work is in the collections of the Smithsonian Institution, the National Gallery of American Arts, the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, and others. It is my pleasure to introduce J. Tomás López and María Martínez-Cañas. Please.
Thank you all for coming this evening. It's a rare treat that you're going to have this evening to actually, we're going to try and have a conversation about the nature of an artist, how they develop an early interest in a given discipline, and how they wind up with a successful career that's full of all kinds of curves and travails. But anyway, I'm going to do two introductions. I'm going to do an introduction about María Martínez-Cañas. Oh yeah, could you please turn off your phones, please? Thank you. Two introductions. One, I would like to have a personal introduction. So, and what it is? I have known María Martínez-Cañas as an artist, teacher, and friend for almost 30 years. Her work, right. Her work, however, was known to me way before I met her. Her reputation as artist, photographer, and enfant terrible made its work through the photographic community. We stood amazed as this young artist fractured the photographic picture plane and left us in awe of her vision and photographic skill. When discussing María, certain words come up with predictable frequency: controversial, vital, dynamic, honest, and driven being among the most common. But to these I would like to add intelligence, generosity, warmth, and compassion. That some of these endow the artist with all the tools necessary, not to just be successful, but to be influential and to have a long-term influence on the history and other photographers. Today's program is $1 with María, and I would like to help the audience understand how an artist's background, culture, language influences the nature of the work. We will have a question and answer period after we go through some formal questions. And I would like to, because I would like this to be about María and her talking about her work. All right, so background, historical background. María leaves Cuba when she's just a few months old. Her family moves to Puerto Rico and she spends the first 18 formative years in Puerto Rico. Her household is one where music and art are very, very important. Both her mother and father instill in the family a love for the aesthetic, right? But I think the interesting part of Maria's background after that is education. Attends the Philadelphia College of Art. PCA was one of the few places in the United States in the 1980s that was doing the kind of experimental work and innovative work that was really, it comes out of the Illinois Institute of Design, the Moholy-Nagy School, and then follows it up by an MFA at the Art Institute of Chicago, which is another place that really comes out of the ID. In photography, there's two schools. There's the Henry Holmes Smith and the Moholy-Nagy. And so you either come out of it as a fractured or basically anything for the image that makes it better, and then the traditionalist. So what I'd like to do is basically ask María if she would talk about how Quince Sellos becomes an interesting body of work, and then we'll go back and talk about the work, that the influences of her education. So Quince Sellos.
how they came about?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, thank you to the Cuban Heritage Collection for having me here. You know, I'm more than happy that the portfolio ended up here. And Maria Estorino Dueling, I have to thank you for that, for making this possibility. And also to the collector who generously gave 2 portfolios, not only the Quince Sellos Cubanos, but also the Páginas de Viaje, which is a less known portfolio, but I think it's, not because it's mine, but I think it's a pretty nice portfolio. But very happy that their home is here now. So thank you so much for having me here, and thank you all for coming this evening. Quince Sellos, the portfolio came about because I was already living in Miami. I moved to Miami on September 1st of 1986. I arrived in Miami. I had ended my time under the Fulbright program and wanted to live in a place. I was living in Chicago at that time, but decided that I wanted a place that I could speak my native language. I'm fluent in Spanish. I had lived in Spain. I just came back from Spain, so it felt that something. My mother was already here, and I think my dad was also already here, so I decided that it was time for me to come. And I had just ended up an exhibition in Chicago that was very, very large. I had to work a lot for that exhibition. I was very tired. And I decided, let me do something for fun. Nothing that starts for fun ends in fun, because because it ended up becoming a 2-year project, like everything else. But I decided, I've been collecting Cuban stamps because I wanted, you know, I come from the generation that we were born in Cuba, but we never had an opportunity to grow up in the country that we were born. But at the same time, I feel extremely Cuban. And I never understood why that is the case, even though I never really lived there. So I had to, at one time, very early in my life, in my early 20s, come to understand what makes me Cuban, you know, and what makes me a Latina. You know, what is it that I have the passion of a Latin and that. So anything that would talk to me about Cuba was something that I was very much interested in. And, you know, the idea of the stamp at that time, because not today, today we have emails. Rarely do we ever get a letter, you know, handwritten letter anymore. But at the time, when you wanted to send news or receive news, you use a stamp to put on an envelope and have that, and that would go on a voyage and a travel. So I thought, let me select 15 stamps that I had collected, not for any economic reason, just because I liked them, and see if I can do 15 images that would be based on each one of those stamps. Needless to say, ended up becoming, you know, a portfolio with 15 boxes, 15, you know, images for each portfolio. And there were an additional 15 with 5 artist proofs, so there was 20 boxes, 15 images each, 15 stamps each. Took me a while to even find all the stamps for each one of the portfolios. And it just went like that. I had, you know, my sister, my oldest sister, Eleni, had she went to Russia on a trip from the university in the 1970s. I think it was 1977, and she brought as a present to me like a little booklet that I still have. And when I opened the booklet, there were Cuban stamps. And the last group was a set of Cuban stamps based on Amelia Peláez. And because I knew her work my entire life because of my parents, I decided I should start with that. And the piece in the stamp portfolio that belongs to Amelia is one of my favorites because it's the last one of the portfolio in the order that I put them. And you know, I grew up looking at her work. I grew up looking at Lamp's work. So it was kind of something that it made sense for me that I would work on that. Not knowing that it was going to end up becoming a much larger thing. But I loved it. You know, it was something, and I love also as a photographer, as you well know because you are a photographer yourself, we like portfolios. Portfolios is a way that we think of creating bodies of work because it's small in scale and because they are contained in a box and we can show them to people. So that in itself is a photographer's think very much as making portfolios. Like today, I would love to make another portfolio. I'm thinking of making 2 projects that will be contained as portfolios also because I like the sense of books. We're losing that aspect of opening and passing a page, and I love that. That's something that is really important to me.
In 1985, you were awarded a Fulbright Fellowship to study in Cuba, in Spain, and you studied early cartographers, the early Spanish explorers who were making maps of Cuba. Is there any link between that discovery in terms of identity and the Quince Sellos?
Absolutely. It was, you know, when I applied for the Fulbright, I have heard my entire life about the Fulbright program. I thought it was something very difficult for me to achieve. That I was not in the level of ever being able to get one. But I had a professor who was a mentor, who is one of the people that wrote one of the essays for the portfolio, who had been a Fulbrighter in Spain in 1960 to 62. And he told me, you know, you should apply, you will be perfect. I had gone to study architecture, Spanish and Portuguese architecture with him the previous summer. And he was the one who told me you should do it. So I had to develop a project to apply for the program. So I just went. I knew that I wanted to go to Spain. I looked on the resources available in Spain, and one of them was the Archivo de Indias in Sevilla. So I, you know, like in the sense of archives and maps, I thought, you know, I could create a project that will relate to the ideas and the issues that are important to me based on the resources that are available in Spain. So I just developed a project working with the maps that Christopher Columbus utilized to discover Cuba as the foundation for my photographic work. Because, you know, at that time we didn't have smartphones, we didn't have Google Maps. We actually took out a piece of map to find out where we needed to go. And I thought if I use a map, maybe if I use this map, I will find my background and where I come from, and I would understand more, and I will connect more with what makes me Cuban. So, you know, when I got it, I couldn't believe it. I was like, you know, and it was amazing because it changed my life. It really validated that I was 25 years old. And I was doing exactly what I needed to be doing. And I have to tell you, in 1988, the University of Miami gave a reception in honor of Senator Fulbright, because he was still alive. The daughter of Senator Fulbright was the wife of the president of the University of Miami.
Bosie.
And they invited all of us to come. At that time, I was already teaching here at UM. So I went there because it meant a lot. I wanted to thank him for the vision that he had to create this extraordinary program between the United States and another country, and especially in the time that we're living today, you know, with all the wars and everything that we have been going in Paris and everything, that this person had an extraordinary vision of making the understanding between 2 countries. It's a way that we can stop racism and prejudice, because, you know, one of those things is the idea that when you don't understand, you are afraid, you know. And I thank him, and it meant a lot to me that I was, like, I have the picture of him and I in my studio up in the wall, because it really, it was an extraordinary program, and it really changed my life. And I would always be grateful, because it kind of focused me, and I don't mean that literally as a photographer, but it kind of focused me to really say, this is what you need to be working on with the maps. And it took me 10 years. I mean, I worked with with cartography and the mapping for about 10 years, and the issue of Cuba for about 10 years of my work.
You know, Susan Sontag has famously said, those who have been robbed of their past are the most avid picture takers. A camera is power. It's a weapon that empowers the person who uses it. Do you think that you use the camera as a way to explain your history as a cathartic tool to explain separation from your homeland?
Absolutely. I mean, the photography is great. I love the medium. Is the reason why I continue working with it. You know, after so many years. On November 10th of this year, I celebrated 38 years since my first exhibition. And it's a medium that I was 17 years old. It was the night before, I opened the show the night before taking the SATs in Puerto Rico. Well, I remember, I mean, who can forget that, you know? And I mean the SATs, not the show. The show I have never forgotten either, but it was, you know, it never occurred to me that I was going to do photography, because I have done it my entire life. I mean, my parents were art collectors. Like I asked my dad once, how come you never had photography as part of the collection? And which he's here, so I can say this. He told me, I don't know anything about photography. I know about painting and I know about sculpture, but I don't know about photography. And photography, what brought me is that my mom had taken a camera out of Cuba, and I became fascinated with the object of the camera. So, and the understanding of how it worked fascinated me, to the point that I wanted to, it's a curiosity. I think that we have a curiosity as artists that I think that you need to promote and to use it. You know, I mean, I consider still to be extremely curious. I always want to learn things. You know, I haven't been in school in many, many years, but I'm always want to learn. And the curiosity of wanting to understand how the medium works, it fascinated me. You know, I developed a first roll of film when I was 8. Asked my parents to not park in the garage in the house because I wanted to turn it into a darkroom, and they didn't. Which was incredible. I mean, I loved it because they were like supported, you know, that. And every Sunday we would go in Puerto Rico to take pictures in the island. And that meant a lot to me. But primarily music and visual arts, painting and sculpture, they were really big in the house. But I love the idea that they took, you know, we're losing teaching art as part of the educational system here. And you know, for those of us that had the opportunity to be exposed to art so early in our lives, it really did change. You know, I never knew this, that I was going to be doing this. I mean, I just went to, the SATs were coming up and I have to ask where to send the results of the SATs, and I went to a teacher of mine in Puerto Rico, my Spanish literature teacher in high school, and I asked her, what do you think I should do? And she said, she didn't even think, she said, you should do what you love to do the most. And I say, if I do that, then I have to do photography. And she says, study that. And I say, you can? Because I didn't even know that you could do that. I mean, it never really occurred to me that you could actually, you know, take a class in photography. And I'm glad in a way that she did not say, no, that's not going to take you anywhere. Go for law or medicine or something like that. Because God knows if I had gone to that, I would have not, maybe it would have taken me a little longer to get to art. But it's what I love to do. And I have never, and you know me, we know each other for many, many years.
Since you were 1. Yes,
since I was 1. You know, it's what I love to do. I mean, how happy can we be that we do what we love to do? Oh, sorry. We're very unhappy.
Anyway, so I want to take you to Philadelphia because, all right, so I know you get a Hasselblad when you're 15 years of age. And,
and it terrified me.
But let's just go back. So you arrive in Philadelphia, and at this point, I imagine you're making traditional photographs.
I did traditional photography the first 2 years that I was in Philadelphia. In my junior year, I took a junior workshop, that was the name of the class, with John Redmond. She had been, she went to the Institute of Design in Chicago, the Mahoney Nash Bauhaus School. And a lot of educators of photography at that time had gone to school at the Institute of Design, which is it was an extraordinary school. And I had an assignment that had to be in the form of a book. That was the assignment. You could do the book about anything you want. It's a photography class, so it had to be a photography book about any subject that you wanted to do it. So I thought, what should I do? So I decided, well, let me combine the two things that I really love, which are music and photography. So I decided to take a violin concerto, Max Bruch, Concerto number 1 in G minor, Opus 26. I'm looking at my father because he's probably like checking to see if I say it correctly. And I decided, let me see if I can take this music and translate it into photography. I have not done any abstract work at all. I was doing what we normally intro to photo, narrative, still life, but the still life assignment, that's when I decided, no, I'm not doing a still life assignment because that's terrible. But I decided to combine how, when I combine the music, somebody mentioned, I mentioned to a teacher of mine, how can I bring music, if I want to write music. And I remember that my father had an oscilloscope in the music studio in the house in Puerto Rico, which is a machine. He would put a record, and there would be a screen that was like 3 by 3, okay? And that machine would go up and down depending on the music. So I would turn down the volume, and I would visually look at that thing. I would be fascinated by that machine going up and down. So visually, I would listen to the piece. So I decided, what happened if I take that experience and bring it into photography? So a teacher mentioned, I told the teacher what I wanted to do, and he said, there's this material called amberlith that blocks the light. If you scratch it, it would allow to put the light, so maybe it will help you. So that's what I would listen to the music for about 3 months, and I would then scratch the material based on the emotions that I would get from the music. And then I would take that material and contact print it into photographic paper. And when I took it to the class and I put it up and I told everybody that was a photograph, my classmates hated me because they say that's not a photograph. And I said, well, it's a piece of photographic paper. And they say it's not a photograph. We don't recognize anything. And I say, you don't have to recognize anything. Photography doesn't have to be that you record only the outside world. It can be a tool to understanding who you are. And that's why I turn it into myself, because it kind of makes sense to me that this is the way that I could understand. This will be the source and the way that I would go to understand what makes me who I am. And I needed to come to terms with that, because I felt a little in limbo, where I didn't know, I didn't belong. I didn't grow up in Cuba. I was born there, but I didn't grow up there. I didn't, I live in Puerto Rico, but I was not born there. I live in the United States, but I was not born there. So it was like all these things were suddenly, bringing up. And I would say, why, and I have to tell you, I describe myself today. I'm a Cuban-born, Puerto Rican-grown American citizen. And the 3 aspects of those identity, those 3 cultures have influenced the way that I see things, the way that I relate to the world in which I live, the way that I perceive the world in which I live. Because I understand also that growing up in Puerto Rico had an impact in my life, because Puerto Ricans are born United States citizens, but they have a different language. It has a Spanish language. They want to maintain the English also culture, but they want to maintain the Puerto Rican Spanish from Spain also. So they're very proud in their identity, and I think that kind of rub off on me a little bit. I wanted to be proud of where I come from. I wanted to be proud to understand that Cuba is made out of Cubans in the islands and Cubans out of the islands, and we are all over the world. In the place that I live in Spain, the apartment below me, there was a Cuban woman that my grandfather had been her mother's doctor in Cuba. And you know, it's like, my God, we're all over, you know, and that fascinated me because it kind of made me very proud that even though I didn't have the possibility of growing there, that I felt very Cuban. And I had to embrace that, and I had to celebrate that in my life. With all the good and the bad things, you know, because sometimes we are difficult to have a dialogue with. We get very emotional, very passionate, but it's who we are, you know, and that's something that I think that it kind of had to do with me. And Philadelphia was really great, but I knew that the ones I broke with traditional photography, I never went back.
But I want to stop you there because obviously you were a heretic in that classroom when you show that work. Mm-hmm. I mean, the students, even though it has been said that Joan Blondell's work was mm-hmm. similar in many ways to that.
The classmates didn't like me, but my teachers loved me. But the classmate was difficult to understand because some of them were traditional photographers. You know, sometimes I'm a teacher. You know, I'm a teacher of photography at New World School of the Arts now, and I sometimes get students that are embracing traditional photography. I embrace them too because we celebrate, that for me is the history of the medium. And we can't forget that, you know, we have to honor, as Sally Mann says, the gods, the photo gods before us, you know? And that is important because I may not choose to make the traditional photography, it doesn't mean that I cannot take a photograph. And you know, the other day I was at Rhode Island School of Design giving a lecture on my work, and somebody, you know, people ask me, do you know how to take a picture? And I said, well, I do have a Bachelor of Fine Arts in Photography and a Master's in Photography. Absolutely, I can. It's like asking Picasso, I mean, I'm not comparing myself to Picasso, I'm sorry, that was a bad example. But, you know, Picasso selected to work in a style, but he knew how to paint extraordinarily. I mean, and when we go to the Picasso Museum in Barcelona, we confront that of an extraordinary painting that he did at the age of 16, and it's extraordinary. But he didn't select it to continue working in that style. It doesn't mean that he doesn't know how to do it. So it fascinates me because sometimes they relate that we do experimental work maybe because we don't know how to take pictures, and that's not true at all.
But for some people it is.
Yes. No, I don't mean, absolutely. Okay. I don't mean everybody. But, you know, I love to take pictures. And, you know, it's something that last summer, I was on a fellowship in Italy. And, you know, I bought my first digital camera. And I decided that it was time to reevaluate the way that I took photographs. And I was in Italy just taking straight photographs. And I loved it. Because I also, you know, I think as a photographer, and I love to look at images. I do that every single day of my life, and it was something that it kind of I love to even challenge myself to see if I can do it, and if I like what I'm doing. If I ended up showing that work or not, that's a different story. But you know, it's concept and ideas is really what tells me what to work on.
So, following your lineage, so you leave Philadelphia and you go to Chicago. Mm-hmm. What was the main difference between being at PCA and being at the Art Institute? Were the influences there more serious? Did you, at this point, realize that this wasn't just a temporary thing? This was what you were going to do? Tell me about Chicago.
Well, I went to Chicago because I did not know anything about the Art Institute in Chicago. The kind of school that it was, the background, I knew nothing. What brought me to Chicago was because during Philadelphia, my time in Philadelphia, a woman photographer and professor from the Art Institute of Chicago by the name of Barbara Crane came to give a lecture on her work and to work with us, the students. And I became fascinated with her work. I have never seen her work before, and fascinated with her intensity and her passion in regards to the medium. She mentioned that she was a professor at the Art Institute. So I thought, time is coming that I may want to consider applying for an MFA, so let me take this place and see, maybe consider it later on. Then I hear that there is a symposium at the International Center for Photography in New York where Susan Sontag was going to be the main speaker at the symposium. So a group of us, we decided we want to go to the symposium, so we take a train from Philadelphia to New York because we wanted to hear Susan Sontag, which she was extraordinary. But part of that symposium, 2 other people gave presentations, and I loved them. A man gave a presentation. The symposium was about photography and the pornographic image. I don't do pornography, but that was the name of the symposium. And there was different speakers, and one of them was about the photographic image and the symbolisms in Latin America. And that presentation was done by a man by the name of Robert Lesher. Okay? He mentions on the presentation that he is a teacher at the Art Institute in Chicago. I say, wow, that's interesting. And then I hear another speaker by the name of Joyce Neymanas, and she mentions that she was presenting her work, which I thought it was amazing too. To the point that I like even those two, Joyce and Bob, I like their presentation a lot better than Susan Sontag, okay? But she mentioned that she's also a professor at the Art Institute. So I say within 8 months, 3 people whose work I think is extraordinary what they have done. The 3 of them are teachers at the Art Institute in Chicago, and say, I really have to apply to this school. So that's what made me apply to the Art Institute. I didn't know who the faculty was. I didn't know what kind of school it was, the reputation that it had. Remember, we don't have the internet at this time. So for us to find out, but when I remember writing to get a catalog of the school, which took about a month and a half to get it. Today you have it in 5 seconds in your desktop, in your computer. And I remember that I saw even an image of a drawing that had the Cuban flag in it, because they have had students that were Cuban descent also. So I thought there's something really special about the school. So I applied to Cranbrook in Detroit and to the Art Institute in Chicago. And I decided to visit both schools to see where I wanted to go. But I got accepted in both, but once I went to Chicago, I went to see the school and meet Joyce and talk to her and all of that, I say I cannot go. So I took my first semester of grad school, I take a class with Barbara Crane, Joyce Neymanas, and Bob Lesher. The 3 reasons that took me there. And Bob is one of the people that wrote the essays for the stamp portfolio, which he became a mentor, and Barbara Crane also became a mentor.
So as you're going from Puerto Rico to Philadelphia to Chicago, you don't lose a sense of being Cuban. You do not become assimilated into the American photographic culture?
Oh yes, you do, absolutely. And I think that, you don't, and I'm glad that you asked that question, because I have to tell you, my work is not just about understanding my identity. And in a way, I stopped working with the issue of Cuba as a background for my work when I felt that that was the only thing that people were seeing in my work. I didn't want that to happen, because my work is about more than just that. I've been influenced by American photography from the 60s and the 70s. The Ray Metzger, the Barbara Crane, the Barbara Blondeau, the Robert Heineken, the Ken Josephson, the Arno Raphael Minkinen, who was my teacher. It was extraordinary, and that the Bauhaus, having the educators, my teachers who came from the Institute of Design, it was what Moholy Nagy said, is about the light. We need to understand what light does to light-sensitive materials. No matter if we do digital photography or film photography, we need to understand what light does. Light is the most iconic and intrinsic part of the medium. We don't have photography if we don't have light. And that's the reason why I try to maintain the film lab in the school that I teach, because I want the experience. I want my students to have the same experience and the screaming in the dark room when they see that first photographic image come up. It's magic.
It is magic.
And you know, I tell people, and they all scream because they laugh at me, think she exaggerates. We're not going to scream when we go into the lab. Every single semester, they do the same thing. They scream. And have I ever seen any of them scream in front of a display? Never. And that's never going to happen, because what they experience in the darkroom, the smells, the lights, it's extraordinary, and it's part of the medium. And I think that it is the medium that still maintains us, and it challenged, at least to me, challenged me to challenge what it is as a way of expressing visually to me. I like to challenge myself. Maybe that's the reason why I make so many different bodies of work. Sometimes people have difficulty because I change all the time, but I want to continue to challenge myself. I cannot continue doing the work with the issue of Cuba as my work because I know who I am now. I don't have to find that information anymore. I know who I am. And moving to Miami made a lot of sense for me after Spain, because it's very different to work as a minority than to work as part of the majority. And especially, I didn't have to explain myself so much. We understand what it is not to grow up in the country where we were born. And that I needed that kind of support, especially early in my life. And Miami offered, a great quality of life that I was looking for. And my family is here, which, I'm very, I don't know how many times I talk to my dad and my sisters every week, and my mother, I need them, and I need them close to me, and that's something that we can go and we can live. I feel that I can live anywhere in the world. I don't really need to live in Miami, but I love living in Miami because I have these other things that feed and are additions to my life that are important to me.
I want to ask you a formal question about the work, because there are students in the audience, and so your work isn't just that it fractures the picture plane, which, it gets old to say that, but you have very complex semiotics. So once you start looking at the photograph, you have embedded figure-ground relationships, you have hidden little gems that you find. How important is it for you as an artist, for the audience to begin to follow and discover these wonderful little hidden tricks that you put in the images?
Well, I don't think that the public is ever going to completely understand 100% what the artist did. As a matter of fact, there was an article in the New York Times either today or yesterday that Malevich painting the black painting, they just uncovered through this extraordinary x-rays that they did to the painting that he had written information there. It was covered with black paint, but there was something that he meant to be there. And we didn't know that if we didn't have the technology that brought us to uncover those things, So I don't think that the entire message that the artist wants to say is 100% understand. No. I think that when I try, the issues and the ideas and the concept that made me work in my work, if the viewer perceives and understand where they come from, it makes me really happy. But if the viewer or the public understands something else, I'm very much intrigued and want to know what it is that they see, because I think that information is something that maybe even open my own eyes to something that may be right in front of me, and I cannot even see it. I love to have conversations about the work with people, because sometimes I'm having a conversation and they open my eyes to see the work in a manner that I have not even seen yet, at least in my own work. And that sense of discovery, I think, is really good with your own work, and you know, it's something that I think is really, really, for me at least, is really important. Sometimes what I have found through the years is that number one, that the ideas of the work are not understood immediately, that they require time to be understand, because maybe I myself don't even know the reason why I make new work, you know, immediately. You know, it takes time to really look at the work and live with the work. You know, it's very rare that I ever make work. Like this summer, something happened to me that never happened to me before. It's that I am working in a body of work. I am very excited about it. I do this work. I am working for a one-person show in New York that I had in September this year. The director of the gallery comes to Miami to create the exhibition. They were coming to look at other work, but it just happened that I had that work on the walls. And they say, can we have that? And I have just basically like take them out of the oven, okay? They had just been made. And they left to go to New York. And they're no longer with me anymore, you know?
How do you feel about that? Because they're unformed in your mind, right?
Well, because they just left that fast. And then I had the wonderful problem that I sold them also, and now they're gone. And I had, in a way, I'm glad that I scanned them before I send them out, because you know, I didn't have enough time to live with them, but that never had happened to me before, and it was a new experience of understanding that they spent very little time with me, and they left. I was very happy that they did go. Let me mention that I was not opposed or anything, because if I don't like something, I would have never let them out of my studio. But at the same time, I never had where they, you know, they're my kids, they're my legacy. You know, this is, and I'm very much interested in that. As you know, Maria, with the time that she spent in my studio, I like. You know, I am very much interested in archives, and I'm very much interested in what is going to be left behind when I'm no longer here. That is of importance to me. Organizing the work, make certain that and this may be a little bit even related to your question, I want to make sure that my thoughts, when I'm no longer here and able to talk about them, that they are understood exactly as I wanted them to be. I have been in conferences where somebody had mentioned something about an artist and I knew the artist, and I knew that for that artist it was important for the public to know that information. And when it was revealed, it bothered me immensely, because I don't feel that is right. You know, we have the right, this is our work, and for me it was something that to confront that about somebody else's work, it kind of made me understand and make me wonder about my own work too. You know, I'm not an art historian, and art historians and critics may have a way of looking at the work that may make me open my eyes to my own work. But I want to also make sure that the ideas and the thoughts that I wanted them to be understood one way, that are not suddenly turned to serve somebody else's agenda, because that bothers me immensely. I think that personally, in regards to, you know, this is my work. You know, I put my name to these things, and this is my work. And I decide what goes out of the studio and what remains in the studio. And what I know now is that if we don't want anything out of the studio when we're not here, we need to destroy it before we get out of, you know, because I think that it can be later on something that it might be regretful later. I mean, that's just my opinion. I'm very opinionated.
I have a question. So I'm going to read a quote. All right. You mentioned Sally Mann. Photographs open doors into the past, but they also allow a look into the future. Do you think that, can you link the work that's on the wall here to what you're currently doing? Because you're looking at 2 decades of work, almost 3 decades actually.
Where?
From Quince Sellos
Quince
to what you're doing
Sellos?
now.
Oh,
Because
yes.
that was the early 90s?
That was done 91, 92. So that is, 24 years ago. We're getting younger, I guess.
Photographers have a long time.
I see that all the work, no matter if you do early work, it's all related. It's like a wheel. We go around and around and around. And I think the early work is related to the latest work, absolutely. I don't think that is any difference. We evolve. Like I had a collector who came to my studio once and told me with a smile on his face, I hear that you are changing. And I say, no, I am evolving. And he smiled. It is because I'm not the same person I was at 31 when I made this work. I am not going to, how can you expect that I'm going to be doing the same kind of work I was doing at 31 now that I'm 55? I can't. And that's something that, is something that for me, there's no way. My interests have changed. We change. We human beings change. We're not, thank God, we're not interested in the same things when we were in our 20s. And I think that is part of the process, of the creative process and the life of an artist. I'm the same Maria that I was at 31, but I have evolved and I have changed and I look at things completely different. But I see total connection between the stamp portfolio and the work that I do today. It's just a different way of working. This way of working with the rubylith and the subject of Cuba, it was important. I would not be today where I am in my work if I have not gone through this stage.
I have one last question for you before we go open it up to the audience. So what question did I not ask you that you thought might have stumped you?
None. Maybe because we know, we met when you and Carol, his wife, were creating a photography exhibition. We were trying to remember where the name of the place. It's a museum
on the West Coast now, but we can't remember the name of it.
We can't remember. It was near Tampa, no?
Yeah.
Or St. Peter, Tampa or something like that. So I go, that's how we met. And would I be surprised with any question you would have asked me after that? Absolutely not. To tell you the truth, I think that you've been pretty quiet.
It's not my night, it's yours.
You're pretty quiet, because, it's Tom, and I think, as a matter of fact, wasn't because of me that you learned about the Cintas
Absolutely.
Fellowship?
Which I got the next year.
Isn't that, it's a great...
Could you put in a word for MacArthur?
Are you kidding me?
Anyway,
they don't ask me about that. But sure, absolutely, if you ever need a restaurant, that would be fine. But, we know for a long time and each other, and we have seen, each other. Also, I was teaching here, and when I left, you came here. I saw you at Rochester also for the show at the Visual Studies Workshop. Yeah, it was freezing.
Did you stay with us?
Yes.
Right.
Yes. That's why I think you're very quiet. But, we're two photographers, or maybe two people that love the medium of photography that are very similar and very different also. But I think the passion of the medium is what, because when we talk, we understand each other. There's photographer has a way of being and talking sometimes that we understand our own neurotic aspect, and especially about dust and equipment and lenses and all of that. And then we have the Latin thing that also is an extra addition to it,
Thank you. So we'd like to open it up for some questions from the audience. Does Does anybody have any questions for Maria?
You can ask me anything you want.
I have a question. It's hard for me to understand the more abstract type of photographs. I mean, I'm always perplexed as to what does it mean, what does it say. On the other hand, a realistic photograph, which I might call a historical photograph, is easy for me to understand. We see today a photograph of Abraham Lincoln, and it's clear that that is what it looked like, his beard, the gaunt face, etc. Had an artist like yourself depicted him in an abstract way, would probably leave us all scratching our head as to what did he really look like. So my question to you is, the comparison between a historical photograph, one that is realistic, versus your aspect, which is abstract and it's your creation that comes out of your mind, your heart, etc. Could you just kind of contrast that and maybe tell us how you see them and whether or not your type of art, the abstract photograph, may live the ages like a historical photograph seems to live the ages?
Well, let me just say I may have made him look a lot better. You never know. You know, and I mean that in a good way. You know, photography is more than taking pictures with the camera. And I think that is really the basic aspect that we need to understand. That there are some photographers that select to work in different manners. And let me mention, I don't always work abstract. That would not be even a word today that I would describe myself because I have done, I even did portraits. I'm in the show at the National Portrait Gallery of the Smithsonian. When they came to the studio, I say, you do know that I don't do portraits because I only did one series, but that's the series that they wanted to show. So I think that the thing with the medium is that it offers you an unlimited possibility to talk visually with it, okay? At the same time, I am fascinated by historical images or by images in general because photography talks. If you look at it, photography has the ability to tell you things. The only thing you need to do is to actually spend the time looking at it, okay? And that fascinated me. Now, if I decide to work more abstract or not, I think that it is really based, what defines the materials that are used are the concept and ideas. You know, I wake up with an idea that I wanted to work and issues that I wanted to work with, and then those ideas are the things that tell me, okay, how can I best express that idea three-dimensional or in a real thing. So it can take me to Home Depot, or it can take me to pigment photo, you know. It depends on what is it that I wanna do, you know. But we can, you know, photograph. Anna Atkins, the British photographer that did the cyanotype of botanical plants and material. She was hired by a museum to document plants, and many years ago, in the medium of photography, it was seen as a documentation of a botanical specimen. Today, they're seen as artworks, because the approach, even of the public, to those objects have changed completely. Would I have been able to work the way that, in the manner that I work, if the history of the media have not had people like Ray Metzger or Barbara Blondeau or some of these other, you know, artists like Ed Ruscha, who embrace the medium of photography even though they don't consider themselves to be photographers? Probably not. And, you know, I needed them first because they are the ones that broke ground in perception in regards to the medium. I really didn't break any ground. What I did is I just work in a style that fit me. I'm sorry, I can't speak English anymore. It fit me, and I just use it to work for me. Also, I have said it many times, I don't know how to draw. What I'm able to do with an X-Acto knife, what I used to create the stamp portfolio, I have no idea how to draw. I cannot do it with a pencil at all. We have a magical aspect thing with the camera. We love the cameras. And that's something that, you know, I remember sitting next to Maria in a lecture at Books and Books, and she had a nice camera in her hand, and I was not even listening to the person that was talking. I was looking at the object because I was fascinated by the camera. And I love that. It's still, it's you know, it's magical. It's magic. It really is magic. Yes.
Could you just talk a little bit about the more recent bodies of work, the vestigios, drawings, and also the bunkers?
Yeah, vestigio came because last year I went on received a fellowship to live 6 weeks during the summer at the Civitella Ranieri Foundation in Umbria. And that's the reason why I bought the digital camera, because they didn't have a darkroom, so I wanted to photograph. I heard, because I had a friend of mine that had been a fellow the year before, that they really were not set up for a photographer, even though, you know, they select photographers to go there. So I decided, what can I do there? I live in a 15th century castle for 6 weeks. I have my own apartment and my own studio. They cook lunch and dinner every single day for the 14 fellows that were there. We were musicians, composers, writers, and visual artists. So you can do whatever you want. And I remember that to go to my apartment, I have to go through the library. And sure enough, you know, books I love, so I decided to see what photo books they had. And they had one that for some reason the cover always was like calling me, you know, judge a book by a cover. Sometimes it's very true. And I remember, oh my God, this image is it's a sculpture, it's a photograph of a sculpture by Morton Schamberg, and the piece is called God. Okay, so I remember looking at it, and I decided, I have brought photographic paper with me that I needed the sun to print. It's no longer made. Okay, but I have 2 boxes left from my early project that I have done a few years ago. So I decided, let me take this book and create photographs from the pages of that book, okay, as a way of almost recording a trace of the page of that book. Okay, so the idea of vestigios started fermenting basically on that trip in Italy, because then suddenly, to go also to my apartment to enter the library, I went by this little sculpture of this man who looked like a saint. I never find out who he was. The shadows of the windows to the sculpture were creating shadows behind it. So I closed the windows one afternoon, and I put photographic paper I tape it on the wall behind the little sculpture, open the windows, and at 9:30 in the morning the next day, I leave my apartment, I go by the little guy, and the image had been created. And it was exactly, because that's a trace, you know, and I started thinking, there are houses in Cuba, and not only houses in Cuba, but there are houses and places that people have paintings for 30 years in the wall. And if the sun hits every day, at one time they may pick up the painting and take it out, and you will have a ghost image of that. If I go to the beach and I go with my watch, and when I get home I take it out, I have a ghost image of my watch there. And that's a photographic process. So I started thinking about the traces of things that are left behind. So arts writer, a Cuban arts writer and curator by the name of Carlos Luis had recently died a year ago. And he had lent me a book for when I did the series photo painting. So his widow, Marta, called me up and said, I would like for you to have the book of Hans Bellmer that you used for that body of work that you did. I went to her house to pick up one book, and I left with 67 books. which I love. And I saw one book, and I said, there's something about these images on the book that kind of, I may be able to use them for something. So this summer, when I was thinking of vestigios, I decided to open that book, and I took the pages and I started sanding by hand the images from the book. And suddenly the image started to become ghost on the image. You could see certain things, and they're coming pretty soon. It's after the red work I did. This is the bunkers. This is Morton Chamberg, Piece of God. This is the page of the book. These are the images of pages of book that I did in Italy. And it is from this that I go to vestigios, because to me, they're completely different bodies of work, but I started erasing them, and they became, suddenly you could see some of the heads, the face. What are their identity? That's not important to me. Because somebody asked me, what was the book about? And I say, do you really want to know? And I say, well, it's not important. I say, okay, so do you want to know or not? And one person said no, another person said yes, and I told them what it was, but that's not of importance to me. It was more the idea that you erase, and you erase, it's almost like it's the opposite of what I've been doing in my career. I always add it. I allow you to, well, now that I think about it, maybe it's exactly the same thing.
That would be like a subtraction.
I was hiding things. I was not adding things. I was hiding things from you, and from you meaning everybody. And if you think about it, that's exactly what it is too. It's the idea that I don't allow everything to come out.
But you were aware, I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt. You were aware of Rauschenberg's Erase the Kooning.
Yes, and I love it. And that, I am amazed that you said that, because I consider it to be one of the most important moments in our history, personally for me. I love Rauschenberg's work. I think that he was an extraordinary influence in my career and in my work. Met him briefly when he was already old, when he had his show at MAM, which I have known him, better and longer. But really never had a conversation with him at all. But for me, he was God, because he was an extraordinary artist. But what he did and what he's referring to is that de Kooning was a bigger artist compared to Rauschenberg at this time. This, I think, is in the early 50. Okay, so de Kooning is the master. Yeah. Rauschenberg is the younger artist. And they knew each other, so de Kooning gives Rauschenberg a drawing that he made. And the next thing he knows, Rauschenberg puts it on one of his exhibitions, because he took the drawing and he erased it, de Kooning's drawing. And de Kooning was in shock that Rauschenberg had erased his drawing, and now it was a Rauschenberg piece, not a de Kooning piece, And I find that moment, I mean, first of all, the idea of, and in a way, like I told Maria, I own archives in mines that belong to Jose Gomez Sicre, and I called Maria not long ago, and I say, I used 2 of Gomez Sicre's images on the archive, and I actually erased them. And she said, I hope you scan it first. And I say, I forgot. I erased it first, and then I realized, oh, I didn't scan it, But it is part of that. And that is something that I, felt is Gomez Sicre's image important to me? Absolutely. But now this image that started with Gomez Sicre and now is my work, for me, is even more important, and that is something that process is very important. Bunkers came from a completely different, it was 2 years before. It was a collaborative project with Rafael Domenech, who is a young Cuban painter who had just received the Cintas Fellowship in the Visual Arts. A graduate from New World School of the Arts, where I teach. He was a student of mine. I go to Berlin with a group of students. Rafael was not part of that group. And I went to see the Boros collection, who is located in Berlin in a bunker. And they talked to us about the building, And I became more fascinated with the building than with the art collection that was inside that. And they were giving us a tour and talk. And that idea of what we use a bunker is for protection. A bunker is, today, there are people that construct homes with bunkers. So that aspect of protection was something that intrigued me very much. So when I came back to Miami after that trip, I started having conversation with Rafael about architecture, scale, and the idea of bunkers. And one conversation led to another, and I asked him if he would like to collaborate on a project with me. It's the first and only time that I have done a body of work with a student of mine. And I, because some people ask me, how come you did that with a student? And it doesn't really matter to me, because I don't do it for anybody. I do it for, did I ever thought that this work was going to ever go out of the studio? No. But I have nothing to lose. I just love to work. And it was something that, I thought that it really was working. Because I have only collaborated once before. This is the second time that I did that. And collaboration is a voice of one artist, the voice of another artist. And what you try to do is put those two voices together and create a third voice. And that, to me, if you're able to do that, then it is a successful collaboration. Because one artist should not be higher than the other. They should be on equal terms. So that, I think, that we did on this body of work.
Other questions, please?
Do you remember the point in your life, that moment when it made you stand out from traditional photography?
Everybody hear that?
Do you remember that moment? Can you recall that moment in your lifetime when that made you break out from the mold from everybody from traditional photography and made you stand out into your own right?
And if you ask me at the moment that I realized that photography could be more than just traditional photography?
No, that moment when you were doing, you said you were doing traditional photography for several years first, and then you did something that made you stand out of the crowd.
Yes.
Do you remember that moment?
But the reason why I ask you is because I remember exactly the moment that I realized that photography could be more than just photographing with the camera. And it was when my parents, we were on our way to, I was 15 years old, and my parents took us on a trip to France. But we're living in Puerto Rico, so for us to go to France, we have to go Puerto Rico, New York, Paris, okay? And they took us to the Museum of Modern Art in New York. And I remember entering the MoMA in the photography galleries, and they had a photograph by Harry Callahan that were leaves that were sticking out of the snow. And I remember when I looked at that image, I didn't see a photograph. I could swear that I was looking at music, at written music. And I remember at 15 years old thinking, this is the way that I would love to do my work. This is the way that photography makes sense to me. Because I had the importance of music in my house, in our house in Puerto Rico when I played the piano. You know how your parents always make you, play an instrument. They did that to us. So I learned how to read music. I was not very good at what I played, which was the piano. But music was important. And I remember that image specifically as the beginning of the possibilities that I could break. So when that assignment was given to me in my junior year, now we're talking about, I'm not 15, I am 20, okay? 5 years later is when I wanted to mix photography with music, Callahan came back to haunt me. And I remember thinking, this is the way that I need to express music. And then I associated also with the oscilloscope that my dad had in the music room in San Juan. And it made sense because I have seen that image 5 years earlier. I have seen that music even earlier, and now suddenly I had the opportunity to do it my way. And that once I did it, and it started, I mentioned a still life assignment. I mean, do you give that assignment? I mean, who wants to do that as an assignment of a still
It's the
life?
20th century.
It's horrible, okay? But I had an assignment that had to do a still life, and I was totally opposed to do something like that. But I always believe that you, and I tell now my students this, if you get an assignment that you despise, that you hate, what you need to do is find a way to turn that assignment to work for you, because it's going to make you want to do that assignment. It's going to bring the passion and the interest on something that you know that you don't want to do. So what you need to do is turn it to work for you. So what I did is this. I photographed dead flowers. I photographed the still life, dead flowers, objects, all of this. I went to the darkroom and I developed the rolls of film. I went to the darkroom and I print an image of the still life that I have done. I have done like one thing next to the other, okay? I took the negative out of the negative carrier. I turned on the white light on the enlarger and I exposed white light onto the print. So now the still life was black. But before I turned on the white light, I took those pieces of rubylith and I put them on top. Rubylith is a material that I use to make the stamp portfolio that allows me to block light into the paper. So I cut little pieces and I put them on a line. And I throw the white, that's when I throw the white light. I then take the paper out. I remove those little pieces of rubylith that I have put and I put it into the developer. So when I get to the class, I put up my assignment and everybody say, where's the still life? And I say, behind the black. And they had to get really close because it's only on those little fragments that I allow you to see the still life. My classmates hate me, but my teachers love me. So I got an A in the class because I thought, I don't want to do a still life. The still life is there. It's just that it's behind the black. That's when I realized. And you know, it's really important that you find, for me at least as a student, if you find the teachers that allow you to be who you really are, and they allow you to blossom with your ideas, with your neurotic behavior, with whatever issues you have, and what they do is they just guide you and help you to get to where you want to go. I think that is one of the greatest things, because teachers are, I know that I am a teacher today because of the great teachers that I had when I was young. I want to give back what they gave me, because they were so important in my life that, you know, I want to give back. And if I am able to change somebody's life, one person, I am doing a good job, you know, because it's really, and that's what happened, is that the classmates didn't want me to do this, but the teachers were like, Maria is doing something that may not make sense to us, but we need to let her be herself. And that was in Philadelphia as it was in Chicago, you know. But in Philadelphia in particular, you know, Philadelphia, of the two schools, if you ask me which was the one that was the most influential in your life, Philadelphia. The one that is the best known, Chicago. The one that has the most prestigious, Chicago. Prestige, Chicago. But the one that was more influential in my life, in my career, with my teachers, and my teachers that are still mentors today, Philadelphia. And by the way, let me mention, I went to Philadelphia because RISD didn't accept me because I didn't know how to draw. And you know, it was great to be back. It took me 37 years to get to RISD. But I told them. But you know, it needed to happen what it happened if I had gone to RISD. I mean, I would have had Callahan and Sifkin
into design.
And I would have told Callahan, I love that image of the snow. It really was great. But, you know, I didn't know how to, and you know, I have to tell you, I called home in Miami 12 times the first 3 days that I moved to Philadelphia because I was very homesick, to the point that they got me to apply to UM, and UM accepted me, so I was considering leaving Philadelphia and come to UM instead. But on the fourth day, my mom called me because I didn't call home because she was worried, you know. And she said, "Are you okay? You haven't called?" I said, "I'm fine. I love it. I'm staying."
Thank you.
Yeah, but it was good. Yeah.
Last question, okay?
So my question goes to, on one side, copyright, or the law, and another, artistic expression. Mm-hmm. You mentioned 2 examples of an artist taking another artist's work mm-hmm. and modifying it, changing it to make it their own. So how do you feel? And you also said sometimes you don't want your own art to leave your studio. So how do you feel about an artist taking your work and then changing it for profit, or just changing it in general and pretty much calling your art their own?
It happened. It already happened by a student of mine, and that was kind of sad. But when I have used somebody else's work, in the title is their name, so I don't hide that at all. It's totally the opposite. It's an homage in a way to them. I think that you have to be careful. You have to think about it. It's not something that you can avoid it. I mean, we have some of the greatest, Andy Warhol. There was a lot of artists that have used, the work of other people. It depends on how you do it.
Sherry Levine.
Hmm?
Sherry Levine.
Sherry Levine. Oh, yeah, I remember when she did that series on Walker Evans, no? And it was in the 80s, and I was a little like, But I think that it depends on how you do it. If you do it for a way to call it your own and hide it, or as a source, and you say that it's your source, I think that that's wrong. I think that you need to bring it out, okay? But every single thing has to be, it cannot be generalized, okay? I think that you have to really think about what it is that you're doing and the reasons why you're doing it. But it's done, and it's been done for centuries. I mean, really, do we really think that every time that we look at art, that artists are making brand new ideas? Everything has been done before. Yes. Thank you so much.